afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm delighted to be here. I've enjoyed all the presentations throughout the day. So my presentation today will be about blockchain, also the next one by my colleague. And the intention is to understand the possibilities out of this technology and how they could change construction industry. So just before I start, a couple of things about me. So I was trained and I worked as an architect for a few years in Greece, in the Middle East, and various other countries. And then I decided I wanted more training, so I was very much drawn to digital architecture and parametric design. So then I studied at TU Delft, and after that I realized that I preferred management over design. So I went to the management side. And I did my PhD on design and construction management, and I was looking at how supply chains are working with technologies like BIM and digitization. And at the moment, I'm a lecturer at UCL in the Bartlett School of Construction and Project Management, where I'm focusing my research again on BIM and digital, but at the same time, I'm part of the Construction Blockchain Consortium that this presentation will be mostly about. So just an overview of what we will be discussing the next 20 minutes. My point of view starts from the supply chain, so I was always interested to see how different firms work in projects and how all this complexity comes into delivering successful construction projects. And of course, we have all these new innovative technologies, digital, and so on, and they are affecting how we're doing things, the business as usual. So to this end, and all this complexity at the supply chain level, and all this BIM and digital novelties that we are working daily, I will add another complexity in the equation, so I will be talking about blockchain and what it can do for construction. So typically when I speak about construction and BIM and so on, I like this image very much because it's very messy. And most of the times we ignore and we forget how things take place on the site. So this is not a typical site, but still we are familiar with this image, which means that it might also take place. So then when you have this in your mind, and you're thinking about innovation, is this fit for purpose? Can we be innovative and also maintain this culture? So my presentation will be both about culture and structure and how the supply chain works with digital technologies. So in terms of structure, we all know it's a very project-based industry, so we move from project to project. Typically, we don't learn out of this process. And it's an industry which has a lot of high demand, but also supply variability. So many different actors coming together to construct an asset. And typically, yeah, all of us know that it's beyond schedule and beyond budget. So a couple of things of my background. As I said, I studied in the Netherlands. So over there, for those who are not familiar, the construction industry there is more collaborative. So they engage in long-term relations. They work well with one another. They also learn. So I worked and I studied there for 6 years in total. And I interviewed many people. I researched many projects where they were using BIM and how they were using the technologies and taking advantage of the interoperability and capabilities to work collaborative in that. But at the same time, I did observe mistrust and fragmentation of information and also lack of risk sharing. So these are problems that even in the most collaborative industry, we can get them. And then naturally, when I moved less than 2 years ago from Holland here in London, I saw these problems even more emphasized in a sense because it's a larger industry, way more fragmented, and this collaborative culture, I understand it's not really there. So apart from these structural characteristics, of course, we know that it's very fragmented. So we have many small companies, SMEs, working around and trying to deliver projects. And we have many different tiers, and it's more hierarchical than network. So we have a contractor and so many different subcontractors who are delivering things, and they are unknown one to the other what the firm next to them are delivering. So typically in construction, we have many different tiers being engaged in all this process. And yeah, the structure, as I said, was more central. So we have a contractor who holds all the contracts, like the spider in the web, as they say. And then, of course, this has implications for culture and how people interact. So typically, construction has a very adversarial culture. People have a very blame culture. They blame one another. They don't trust. They don't share information. And trust also is of many different types. So it's not only interpersonal trust. It's also trust about how well they could do their job, how trustworthy and reliable is their data and the information that they're sharing, and at the same time, whether they want to help, the goodwill trust, as we say. So all of these problems, trust, they're still there. We have new technologies, but they're still there. And this is what we'll connect later on to our discussion about blockchain. Blockchain is an innovation. So before discussing about BIM, blockchain, and so on, a couple of things about innovation. Typically in construction, when we talk about innovation, we always import it from other sectors. We might develop stuff, but most of them are innovations in manufacturing or other sectors that are, in a sense, important in construction and adjusted for our benefit. And of course, even when they are important, they're very slow to adopt. So typically, people in companies, they struggle to change and to adopt them. And of course, there are differences across tiers and low digitization everywhere. This was one of the projects that I enjoyed more when I was working more than 10 years ago. So all of you must know the Burs Tower there. And it was one of the projects that people essentially say that was one of the first BIM projects where BIM was used. My experience as an intern there was that essentially all these panels, everything was designed AutoCAD. So from the moment it went to the subcontractors, from the moment the design was awarded, everything was 2D and everything was designed by hand. So we had to design 3,000 different GRC, glass reinforced building components to clad the whole complex. So we're talking about innovations, but still we're doing things very traditionally. This traditional mentality, people are feeling that they're pressured by time, that they're approaching projects just from the money perspective. They don't trust, they don't show all the cards on the table. But at the same time, because of all the digital, we have been hearing people coming together in the table to discuss more and to move towards a more digital delivery, and at the same time, rejecting the old ways of doing stuff. So that's a very positive sign, but at the same time, you are all familiar, I would assume, with this graphic from McKinsey. At the same time, construction is here, right? So at the very bottom of this matrix. So typically, it's not digitized, and their criteria here, I don't know how they did the analysis, but they have assets, so we do know our assets are not digitized. The use of information, the same, so all the transactions are completely analog in a sense, or at least not fully digital, and of course labor, so work. All these are done in a traditional way, and many other industries are doing much better than us. And a couple of things about BIM. So I like the word modeling inside the building information modeling word. And actually I like it because it's not only 3D modeling. What most people have a reaction to is to to use interchangeably BIM and 3D. It's not the same, of course, because modeling in a structured way of information can help you essentially maintain some level of consistency and structure in how you're setting your information. So I'm agnostic as to software and so on, as long as we can use some models and data models that can help us support our work. And at the same time, we of course have a 3D model, but a modeling database in a sense. So we have different information about objects, either material, energy, cost, and so on, that we can use to manage the process. You've seen this image? So if you go Google BIM, you will get something like that, right? So BIM is in the center. Everyone around is very happy. They're very much supported in their work. But this is, I'm allergic to this image. This is not the reality, actually. This is very far from reality, because we essentially have many different teams, either in the office or in construction or in the client, where they're working using different means. So we have a hybrid way of working in projects. We have, yes, the digital, yes, the electronic emails, a lot of phone calls, a lot of meetings, a lot of co-locations. So there are many different means that we daily use to do our work. So BIM is essentially not a quick fix for all this complexity. And indeed, there are some persistent challenges in a sense. Accessibility, IP, people in firms, they talk a lot about not wanting to share their commercial advantage. Accountability, provenance, who did what, to what extent is this information right? And of course, other challenges are more technical, like interoperability. Yes, we're doing steps towards that direction, but still the real-time, fully interoperable BIM and so on, they're not there yet. So we still have many steps. And at the same time, although we have benefits undoubtedly, we still cannot change this whole transactional mentality of construction by simply using BIM and simply using a technology. So we cannot increase the trust. Here's where it goes to the blockchain part of my presentation, essentially. And I use this introduction, rather long introduction, to show you where I'm coming from and my perspectives from the supply chain and BIM side to the blockchain. So that's a persistent problem. That's at least my own problem or my worldview. That's what I'm interested in, the supply chain relations and how they are very tense and how they're so unstructured and so complicated. And they're not helping towards a successful delivery of projects. At the same time, you have all this discussion about digital and BIM. And the next step is to discuss how blockchain could help the future. So blockchain. Anyone here is familiar with blockchain? Yes? Yes? Would you like to? No. That was easy. OK. So I will provide some background. And of course, everything is open for discussion. So most of you have seen these diagrams from Bitcoin. So my title of the presentation was also that we're looking beyond cryptocurrencies. So it won't be a presentation about cryptocurrencies of Bitcoin and so on. So sorry for those of you who wanted to see that. So I will focus more on the blockchain. And this is a very basic diagram of how the Bitcoin blockchain is organized. So essentially, there are some packages like that, which are called blocks. And each one has a tree there, a hierarchy there, which has other transactions in some specific size, length blocks. So this is useful in order to understand. This is useful in order to understand the key concepts of the technology. So essentially, distributed ledger technology is a cryptographically assured and synchronized record of consensus. Consensus is very important as a word because essentially this is what we're looking for mostly in construction, that's the uncertainty that we have, and we don't trust people. So it's good to find a technology which can support that. And at the same time, there are different ways to implement it, essentially, different ways to design this ledger. And it could be either centralized or decentralized, depending on the governance and the chosen political decisions to design it. For example, for those who know about Ethereum is decentralized, whereas Corda is centralized. So there are different levels of information and transparency there. At the same time, blockchain technology is an implementation layer of a distributed ledger. So it's something which is helping, essentially, create this blockchain of distributed ledgers, as I presented in the figure before. So essentially, it creates some blocks, some very small pieces of data, which are housed in specific lengths in order to fit some specific criteria, in order to validate and fit some specific criteria. And the way it works is that at the beginning, we have a transaction, that we formulate a transaction. For example, I want to pay this subcontractor, for example, and then we put a request in the network because it's distributed, as I said before. So we're saying, I want to pay this subcontractor, could you confirm this? And then the network validates the transaction. So the transaction becomes a block, similar to the diagram I saw it in the previous page. And then this block is chained to a public blockchain of other similar blocks and transactions, which could be related to that project, to other projects, to the whole construction industry. It depends on how you design that. And at the end, this transaction is confirmed, and then the knowledge of this, of paying this subcontractor is public knowledge. So you don't have uncertainty, and you can trust people. This is the most visual my presentation can get. So I have a GIF here. This is not, this is a side chain. It's not very helpful to understand the whole blockchain, but it's just to show that they have here a subset, a side chain, so, and some computers linked who are preparing some packages of information. And then all this information, all these blocks which are created, they're added to the public blockchain. So this is how typically it works. We have a network validating and then becoming, through the block, part of public blockchain. Okay, and we have seen many different applications in other sectors. So for the rest 5 minutes, I will be discussing what we can do with this, with blockchain and what we have. So we have seen a lot of applications, of course, in finance, typically more for utility and commodification. So we have all these coins and the cryptocurrencies and the tokens and so on. So this is one application that could be one application of construction. At the same time, we could have more transactional focus and use this blockchain way of doing things for payments, micropayments, and using more transparency in how we are implementing our contracts, essentially. In logistics, there are many examples from other sectors, from other examples like agriculture, industry, food, logistics, and so on. So what they're doing there, they're essentially using blockchain in order to provide transparency for business-to-business systems and create information which is, it has quality. They could use it for quality assurance, for insurance of these shipments and these different transactions that are part of their logistics approach, but at the same time for transferring ownership between packages and assets. In healthcare, there are many blockchain applications in healthcare as well. So typically they're used for data integrity and management, mostly IOTA, and also security and privacy. So most of the people think that if we have blockchain, it's public and so on, so everyone knows my data. That's not right. That's not how it really works. Security can be essentially provided by blockchain. So from all these, before I got to that, so from all these, we can pick and choose essentially what we want. What do we need in construction? Trust, transparency. So we can pick and choose from the applications because, as I mentioned before, typically construction is one who imports innovations. So we have some examples that we can use to work towards blockchain in construction. And as I said before, it has to do with, we could have centralized, decentralized ways of using some blockchains, but where we want to go typically is at a distributed level so that everyone can be part of a network. So because construction is, at the moment, when we are in projects, is very centralized, so we have contractors who are holding all the cards and so on, and we want to move towards a more horizontal approach of managing projects. And at the same time, a part of changing the structure of construction, there's an argument for changing the culture. So blockchain in construction will help people, support people in understanding this argument about the digital. Because if we don't understand and do something now, there will be a blockchain imported to construction from a top-down level. So we won't have time to design to our needs. We will typically increase trust among different parties in firms, teams, and among people, because blockchain will help how they are understanding and how they're using information. And at the same time, we can ensure data integrity and provenance, essentially accountability. Some of the applications include smart contracts. Smart contracts could be used for many different applications, like insurance claims, Internet of Things, keeping records, just basic stuff, transactions, payments, and custodianship of information. And of course, it is code. Typically, they're written in Solidity. That's a very popular language. So this is a payment essentially using a coin. So that could be also application for construction. Again, this is payment of employees, of people, and this is an example of selling and buying energy quota, essentially, and crediting. So typically, a blockchain, as I said, is the underlying implementation layer of a distributed ledger. So a distributed ledger means that it is in a public domain, in a public blockchain ledger. However, this is how we're doing things at the moment, at least in the financial sector. So we have a very big bank and so on. However, there is also opportunities for private blockchain ledgers. So this is also a decision making, and a debate always to decide what's the best fit for construction. Are we going to go for a totally public blockchain or a semi-public private blockchain, or are there going to be many blockchains or a huge one with some side chains and so on? So all these are issues to further develop. So what we are doing, the CBC, the Construction Blockchain Consortium, we are essentially an industry-academia collaboration. So we started 2 years ago. Thank you, Abel. We started 2 years ago. The mission essentially is not only to increase all this awareness and share knowledge about blockchain in construction, what's coming actually, but also to do research and development. So the past years we have, we are non-profit, but we have gained funds and we have coordinators now, and we will start doing more research and design, and of course education and training. So we have several strategic partners. And it's nice to see that we have essentially competitors also. So we like that we have competitors coming together at the same table to discuss how to create solutions to increase trust and transparency in construction. And at the same time, the CBC is member of different semi-public blockchains, like the IBM Hyperledger, and we are also supporting knowledge exchange with the Accord project. Yeah, a couple of conclusions, just to leave them there. The construction supply chain, at least for me, that's my motivation, that's my starting point. We have a lot of digital, a lot of technology, but it's not promising to make things more easy. It's essentially adding to the complexity. So one of the solutions is to try to change both the structure and the culture of construction using blockchain. Thank you very much.